They say the loudest person in the room holds the most power. But if you've lived long enough, if you've paid real attention to how people move, lead, control, and survive, you know that isn't true. The loudest person in the room is often the most uncertain, the most performative, the most afraid of being overlooked. Real power doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. True power sits back and observes. It speaks only when it must. It doesn't explain itself to be understood. It lets the silence around it do the speaking. Silence can command a room, disarm a threat, expose the truth, and protect your energy, all without you uttering a single word. Most people misunderstand silence. They think it's weakness, shyness, a lack of confidence. But what if I told you silence is the most misunderstood strength you've been avoiding your entire life? What if everything you were told about speaking up, being heard, and filling the void has kept you from discovering the one skill that can give you your life back? Because silence isn't passive. It's active. It's sharp. It's strategic. When you master silence, you start to notice things. You notice how people reveal themselves when you're quiet. You notice how arguments lose power when you don't respond. You realize that silence is a boundary, one that people can feel even if they don't understand it. You realize silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. Now take a moment. Think back. Have you ever had a moment where you could have spoken but didn't, and in that quiet, everything shifted? Maybe someone revealed something you weren't supposed to hear. Maybe your calm shook someone more than yelling ever could. Maybe your refusal to explain yourself protected your dignity when everything inside you was begging to defend it. That moment, that was power. And chances are you didn't even know it. Because we've been conditioned to speak, to post, to reply, to argue, to explain, and especially to explain ourselves to people who've already decided not to understand us. We've been taught that silence means something's wrong, that silence needs to be filled. But what if you stopped filling it? What if you started using it? Not just to protect your peace, but to shape your identity, your presence, your influence. Because here's the truth. Silence is not a retreat. It's not withdrawal. It's not cowardice. It's focus. It's restraint. It's maturity. It's leadership. Silence is what gives weight to your words. It's what gives space to your thought. It's what allows other people to reveal who they really are, while you remain grounded, clear, and calm. You want to win in a world that's addicted to noise. Don't shout louder, go quieter. Because when you become comfortable with silence, you become dangerous in the best way. You stop reacting to nonsense. You stop chasing validation. You stop losing yourself in noise that was never meant to define you in the first place. You start choosing your battles. You start hearing between the lines. You start commanding attention without demanding it. Silence makes you untouchable, not because you disappear, but because you refuse to be shaken by anything that doesn't deserve your energy. This book, this audiobook, is not about being silent forever. It's not about isolating yourself or rejecting communication. It's about reclaiming your power through thoughtful restraint, through deliberate stillness, through using silence as a tool, a skill, a shield, and a strategy. It's about learning when to speak and when to say nothing, and let your energy say everything. So if you've ever felt like the world was too loud, if you've ever felt unheard, undervalued, overstimulated, or stretched too thin, if you've ever wished you had the strength to walk away from noise instead of getting pulled into it, you're in the right place. Because silence isn't a void. It's not what's left when nothing's happening. It's what allows everything important to happen. In the chapters ahead, you'll learn how to use silence as a weapon, as a boundary, as a way of seeing clearly when everyone else is blind. We'll explore the psychology of restraint, the power of non-reaction, the subtle art of commanding respect without demanding it. We'll talk about how the most influential people in history weren't always the ones who spoke the most. They were the ones who knew when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. This is a journey inward, not into isolation, but into precision. Not away from the world, but into a new relationship with it. One where you decide what gets your energy, what gets your voice, and what gets your silence. This is the power of silence. Let's begin. There are moments in life where saying nothing becomes the strongest decision you can make. Not because you're afraid, not because you're out of words, but because silence, used with intention, is a sharper blade than argument and louder than any shout. Most people don't know this kind of silence. They only know the kind that feels awkward, tense, or empty. But that's not the silence I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of silence that walks into a room and rearranges the energy without ever opening its mouth. Let me tell you about a man named Leonard. He wasn't flashy. He didn't speak more than necessary. In meetings, he rarely offered his opinion first. But when he did speak, everyone stopped. People leaned in. Not because he was intimidating, but because his silence had taught people that when he chose to speak, it mattered. They respected the space he gave himself to think, to process, to evaluate. He didn't try to compete. He didn't chase approval. He controlled the room by controlling himself. Leonard wasn't always like this. He used to be loud, opinionated, quick to interrupt, quicker to defend himself, and he always left conversations drained, like he gave away more of himself than he intended. The turning point came when a mentor said something simple but life-changing to him. You don't always have to put your thoughts into the air to prove you have them. That's when he started studying silence. Not just as a habit, but as a tool. He started noticing how people reacted to gaps in conversation, how quickly they rushed to fill them, how uncomfortable they became when someone didn't respond instantly. He realized that silence made people reveal their motives, that it exposed insecurity and brought clarity. And more importantly, it gave him room to choose his moves instead of reacting emotionally. Now think about yourself. How many times have you spoken too soon, responded when it would have been wiser to wait? Explained yourself to someone who wasn't listening just because the silence felt too heavy? We've all been there, but silence used properly can free you from that cycle. It can shift the power dynamic, not to dominate others, but to stay in control of yourself. Strategic silence is not passive. It's an active choice to observe, to assess, and to wait. It's not about retreating, it's about building leverage. And in every high-stakes environment, from business to relationships to negotiations, leverage is everything. Let's explore what that actually looks like. Imagine you're in an argument. The other person is raising their voice, listing out accusations, pushing for a reaction. Your instinct might be to fight back, to defend your name, to make your side heard. But what if you didn't? What if you paused? What if, instead of reacting, you breathed, watched, said nothing? That silence becomes unsettling. Because now the other person is out on a limb alone. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you'll respond. And that uncertainty, that is psychological power. Because you didn't give it away by playing defense. You stayed still. You gave them space to burn themselves out, to expose their true intention. And when you do speak, your words carry gravity. They feel earned. Silence is not avoidance. It's mastery. Let's go deeper. Silence allows you to hear what others miss. The tone behind the words, the discomfort under the performance. It gives you access to more truth. Not because someone tells it to you, but because you've learned how to listen in a way most people never do. And people notice that. They feel it. It builds presence. Presence is one of those things you can't fake. Either you command attention or you don't, but silence cultivates presence. It forces people to pay attention to your energy rather than your volume. And energy is hard to ignore. Think of someone you know who speaks rarely but always holds weight in a room. That isn't accidental, it's cultivated, and usually it's the product of someone who's learned the value of not always needing to speak. We're taught that speaking up is strength. And in many ways it is. But knowing when not to speak, that's evolution. That's restraint. That's the maturity that turns noise into influence. Now let's switch from theory to practice. There's a psychological concept called the power pause. It's the intentional silence you insert before responding to a question, especially in high-stakes situations. It does two things. First, it gives you space to think, so your answer is more thoughtful. Second, it communicates to the other person that you don't feel pressure to react instantly, that you are in control of yourself. Let's say someone challenges you in front of others, maybe in a meeting or a public setting. Most people feel the need to respond immediately, to prove they aren't weak. But the strongest response is often to say nothing, just for a few seconds. Let the moment let it get a little uncomfortable. Then respond slowly, with precision. The silence before your words makes your voice land harder. It adds gravity. This kind of silence isn't just external. It becomes internal too. The more you practice strategic silence, the more you develop internal silence, the kind that stops your own mind from spiraling, from reacting emotionally, from chasing validation. You start to think more clearly. You don't rush. You don't respond just to be liked. You respond because what you say is what you mean, not what your emotions want you to spit out. That's what makes silence powerful. It's not about being cold or detached. It's about being so connected to yourself that you don't give the outside world the power to pull you in directions that don't serve you. And let's talk about attraction. Not just romantic, but social, professional, personal. People are drawn to mystery, to calm, to presence. When you speak less, people lean in more. When you listen deeply, people feel seen. When you respond slowly, people take your words more seriously. Silence builds that atmosphere. It creates a gravitational pull. It's not about manipulation. It's about becoming someone who doesn't need to chase. Because your stillness already draws the right things toward you. Strategic silence also saves energy. Every time you argue, defend, or over-explain, you spend emotional currency. But not every conversation is worth your energy. Not every opinion deserves your time. Silence becomes a filter, not just to block out the noise, but to protect your focus. To choose your responses based on alignment, not impulse. This doesn't mean you never speak up. It means you stop wasting your voice. You start using it with purpose, with intent. And in doing so, you make your words more powerful. Not because you said more, but because you said less, with more clarity. When you live like this, people notice. You'll start hearing things like, "There's something about you," or "You don't say much, but I always listen when you do." That's not charisma. That's silence. That's control. Let me leave you with this. There will be times where silence is hard, where every part of you wants to fight, to speak, to explain, and you will have to resist that urge. Not because your voice doesn't matter, but because your peace does. Not because you're weak, but because you've decided your power doesn't live in proving yourself to people who've already made up their mind. The more you train yourself to sit in silence, the more you'll see how much energy you've been wasting on noise, how much clarity you've been missing, how much power you've given away by reacting to things that didn't deserve your reaction in the first place. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means something important is. And when you learn to sit in that space, still, grounded, unshaken, you realize silence isn't the absence of strength. It's the beginning of it. There is a moment in every person's life when they realize that not everything deserves a reaction. Not every insult needs an answer. Not every invitation to argue is worth attending. This realization doesn't come suddenly. It creeps in quietly. After 100 battles you never needed to fight, 1,000 words you regret saying, and the slow, exhausting awareness that constant reaction is a form of surrender. Most people spend their lives in a constant state of response. They respond to what others say, to what the world demands, to how they're perceived. They feel the need to explain their thoughts, justify their emotions, defend their position. But in that constant defense, they lose something vital: their peace, their time, and their power. That's where silence becomes something more than a pause. It becomes a shield, a boundary, a filter through which you protect yourself from the things that once drained you. When you master the art of not reacting, of holding your ground without saying a word, you begin to feel something you might not have felt in a long time: freedom. Let me introduce you to someone named Amina. She was a brilliant professional, sharp-minded and kind-hearted, but she had one habit that cost her more than she knew. She always felt the need to explain herself. If someone misunderstood her, she corrected them. If someone disrespected her, she defended herself. If someone questioned her decisions, she replied in detail. It wasn't because she lacked confidence. It was because she thought silence would make her look weak. Until one day, after a particularly draining conversation with a colleague who never respected her work, she realized something. Her explanations weren't earning her more respect. They were confirming other people's doubts. Not because she was wrong, but because she was reacting, and reaction gave them control. That was the turning point. She decided to try something different. The next time someone challenged her, she didn't respond immediately. She took a breath. She looked at them calmly and said nothing. The silence that followed was heavy, but powerful. The other person grew uncomfortable. They repeated their question. Amina kept her stillness. After a few moments, the colleague backed down, unsure of what to say, and for the first time, Amina walked away feeling stronger. Not because she said the perfect thing, but because she said nothing at all. That's the lesson silence teaches over time. That reaction is often mistaken for control, but it's really just submission in disguise. When you learn to pause, to breathe, to wait, you take back something priceless: the ability to choose your response, rather than be controlled by your emotions. This kind of silence doesn't just affect others, it changes you. It slows your heart rate. It sharpens your mind. It separates the noise from the truth. You begin to see patterns in people's behavior. You see when someone is provoking you just to test your limits. You see when someone is fishing for a reaction they can use against you. And you begin to smile, because you've grown beyond the trap. There's a kind of emotional clarity that comes only through silence. When you stop reacting, you start observing. You start asking yourself, is this worth my energy? Does this person deserve my explanation? Am I being baited into defending something that shouldn't even be questioned? Silence gives you time to answer those questions before you give away your power. Silence also reveals intentions. When you don't fill the space with noise, others begin to reveal themselves. The ones who speak too much start to stumble. The ones who manipulate start to panic. The ones who pretend to care begin to show their true colors. Because silence creates discomfort for those who rely on chaos. And that discomfort forces the truth to surface. I once met a man named Jordan. He had a reputation for being calm under pressure. In business meetings, even when things got heated, he never raised his voice. He never rushed to respond. People mistook him for passive until they realized how effective he was. His silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. He listened deeply. He let people talk themselves into corners. He gave them just enough space to reveal what they were hiding. And when he finally spoke, he didn't need to say much. He had already seen everything he needed. That's what silence gives you. Vision, clarity, the ability to read the room while others are still trying to dominate it. But silence isn't just about defense. It's also about creation. Some of your best ideas, your deepest thoughts, your most important decisions will only come when you're quiet. When you disconnect from the noise of the world and reconnect with yourself. That's where silence becomes nourishment. It gives your mind space to breathe. It gives your soul room to expand. When you fill every empty space with noise, music, conversation, scrolling, distraction, you never give yourself the opportunity to hear your own thoughts. You start to lose your internal compass. You become reactive instead of reflective. You confuse movement with progress. But silence changes that. It brings you back to yourself. There's a kind of self-awareness that only grows in stillness. You begin to notice your patterns, your triggers, the stories you tell yourself, and in that awareness, you find something deeper than confidence. You find self-trust. Because now you're not just reacting to the world. You're responding from a place of alignment. Let's talk about alignment for a moment. It's the difference between reacting because something bothered you and responding because something violated your values. It's the difference between defending your ego and protecting your peace. Silence gives you the space to feel that difference, to recognize when you're acting from fear and when you're acting from wisdom. And that's where silence becomes a teacher. It teaches you restraint. It teaches you that every moment doesn't need your voice. Every conflict doesn't need your opinion. Every mistake doesn't need your correction. You begin to understand the power of allowing things to unfold without your interference, of watching rather than fixing, of choosing peace over pride. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become selective. You don't disappear, you become deliberate. And in that deliberation, you become someone others can trust. Because your silence isn't avoidance, it's discernment. It means you don't waste your words. And when you do speak, people listen because they know you're not speaking from emotion, you're speaking from clarity. There's another layer to this. Silence in relationships. We often think communication is the key to every connection. And yes, honest conversation matters, but silence plays a role too. It teaches patience, it teaches timing, it teaches you to listen, not just to the words being said, but to what's being left unsaid. When you allow silence in a relationship, whether it's romantic, professional, or personal, you give space for growth. You allow room for reflection. You avoid saying things you'll regret. You stop trying to control how others see you. And instead, you focus on how you show up calm, grounded, thoughtful. This kind of presence transforms relationships. It diffuses arguments. It invites deeper understanding. It shows maturity. And more than that, it shows respect for yourself and for others. Let me remind you of something powerful. Not everything deserves your voice. Some things deserve your silence. And not because you're defeated, but because you've decided your energy is too precious to waste on noise. The truth is, silence is not just a pause, it's a strategy. It's the gap between impulse and action, between emotion and clarity, between weakness and strength. And the more you master that gap, the more power you gain, not over others, but over yourself. You start to live differently. You start to choose differently. You start to carry yourself with a quiet strength that needs no explanation. And people feel it. They notice, because in a world that's constantly screaming for attention, your silence will become unforgettable. You don't need to be the loudest to be the strongest. You don't need to speak first to be heard. You don't need to respond to be respected. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, and that is the real power of silence. There's a certain weight to silence that most people never learn to carry. It's not just about staying quiet. It's about becoming intentional with your presence, strategic with your responses, and deeply grounded in your self-worth. The silence we're speaking about here isn't passive or awkward. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of control. In life, people often confuse noise with power. They think that the louder someone speaks, the more authority they command. That the more someone argues, the more right they are. That the faster they respond, the smarter they must be. But the truth is often the opposite. Those who feel the most secure in themselves do not need to shout. They do not need to win every debate. They do not need to interrupt to prove their knowledge, because they understand something essential. Real power doesn't need to announce itself, it just is. There's a story I once heard about a man named Eli. He was in a room full of experts, all trying to solve a complex problem during a high-pressure business crisis. People were talking over one another, defending their proposals, pushing opinions, trying to impress the leadership. Eli sat back quietly, watching, listening. He didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. At times, it almost looked like he wasn't even engaged. But when the room finally exhausted itself, someone turned to him and asked for his thoughts. He spoke just 2 sentences, and in those sentences, he not only summarized the entire situation, he offered the exact solution that shifted the company's direction. People were stunned. It wasn't the number of words he used. It was the power behind his silence. He had taken the time to observe what everyone else had missed. While others reacted, he calculated. While they competed for attention, he conserved his energy. And that's the difference. In a world addicted to instant response, the ability to pause has become a rare and undervalued strength. But silence gives you an edge that sharpens your ability to assess, to evaluate, and to act with precision instead of panic. We see this principle everywhere, from boardrooms to battlefields. The most powerful individuals often speak the least. They don't waste words. They don't try to fill the room, because they understand that mystery is part of influence. The more you reveal, the more you give away your position. The more you speak, the more you can be misinterpreted, misquoted, or misunderstood. But when you say less, your words carry more weight. Your silence becomes your statement. This principle doesn't just apply to conflict or strategy. It applies to self-development too. When you begin to embrace silence in your personal life, something extraordinary happens. You start hearing yourself, not the voice you use in conversation, but the voice beneath that, the one you've ignored while life pulled you in every direction. That voice starts small. It whispers things you've forgotten, what you truly want, what you truly feel, what you've been avoiding. And as you allow silence to grow in your daily routine, that voice grows stronger. It becomes your compass. It guides your decisions, your relationships, your priorities. Think about how many distractions fight for your attention every single day. Notifications, conversations, emails, headlines, obligations. Noise isn't just audible, it's mental. And when your mind is constantly reacting to noise, it has no space to create, no room to think deeply, no silence to reflect. That's why so many people feel scattered, anxious, disconnected. They're never really alone with their thoughts. But if you give yourself even 30 minutes of true silence a day, no music, no screens, no conversation, you start to feel your mind stretch. You begin to connect dots. you couldn't see before. You begin to notice patterns in your behavior, blind spots in your thinking, even ideas that could reshape your future. That's not magic. That's the power of space. Space you create by refusing to react, by choosing to be still. There's also a psychological benefit that silence offers in moments of confrontation. When someone expects a reaction, especially a heated one, and you respond with silence, it flips the dynamic entirely. They were prepared for battle. They had their words, their accusations, their logic ready. But when you meet them with silence, they're thrown off balance. They begin to question themselves. They wonder why you're not fighting. And in that space, you regain control not through dominance, but through presence. You can apply this in personal arguments, professional disagreements, or even online debates. The refusal to engage in emotional warfare is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity. You're not avoiding, you're preserving. You're refusing to pour your energy into something that doesn't deserve it. Let's be clear, silence doesn't mean weakness. It means wisdom. It means knowing when to speak, and when speaking would cost more than it gives. It means knowing that silence can disarm an enemy, calm a storm, and reveal truth in ways words never can. It's also important to understand the difference between silent strength and silent suffering. Some people go quiet because they're afraid, ashamed, or unsure of their worth. That's not the silence we're talking about here. We're talking about silence that comes from a position of deep self-respect, silence that stands tall, silence that sees everything but doesn't feel the need to react to everything, silence that isn't hiding but observing. This is the kind of silence that heals, that gives you back control over your inner world, that removes you from the cycle of emotional dependency, where your mood rises and falls based on other people's opinions, actions, or words. Because the truth is, the less you react, the more peace you feel. And peace is not the absence of chaos around you. It's the presence of calm within you, even in the middle of that chaos. I met a teacher once, a man in his 60s who had mastered the art of emotional detachment, not because he didn't care, but because he cared about the right things. He told me, "I don't let the noise of others become the soundtrack of my life." That stuck with me, because so many people let the noise dictate their feelings, their decisions, even their sense of identity. But when you learn to sit in silence, to really sit in it, you begin to rebuild that identity from within, not from outside validation. This matters in your growth journey. Silence becomes the soil in which wisdom grows. Without it, every insight is superficial. Every lesson is half-learned. Every idea is easily forgotten. But when you create space to absorb what life teaches you, to reflect instead of react, those lessons take root. In silence, you begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be, before expectations shaped your behavior, before opinions clouded your instincts, before distractions diluted your focus. You begin to unlearn the noise, and that's powerful. In this world, the loudest person usually draws the most attention, but attention isn't the same as respect, and it certainly isn't the same as influence. True influence is quiet, subtle, intentional. It's the kind that doesn't force its way into a room, but shifts the energy of the room just by entering. It's the kind that speaks less and says more. This level of influence doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from being more grounded, more conscious, more patient. That's what silence cultivates. So if you've ever felt the urge to prove yourself, to speak louder, respond quicker, defend harder, pause, ask yourself, is this a battle I need to fight? Or is this a moment to rise above? Does this situation require my voice, or does it require my silence? More often than not, you'll find that the answer lies not in more noise, but in less, in the calm, in the pause, in the silence that doesn't ask for approval but stands firm in knowing. That's where your real power lives. It doesn't live in how fast you reply to criticism. It doesn't live in how loud you speak in a crowd. It doesn't even live in how well you argue your point. It lives in your ability to be still, be observant, and be unshakable, because the person who masters silence masters themselves, and the person who masters themselves can never be controlled by others. It's one thing to understand the power of silence in theory. It's another to live it in practice, especially when the world is constantly demanding a reaction from you. Every day, you're provoked. Someone says something disrespectful. Someone challenges your beliefs. Someone misunderstands you, underestimates you, or outright ignores your presence. The instinct to respond is primal, but responding isn't always winning. Sometimes the most powerful move is restraint. There's a quiet kind of confidence that emerges when you stop explaining yourself. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you realize not everyone deserves access to your mind. Every time you explain your worth to someone determined not to see it, you water a garden that was never yours to tend. Silence protects you from this endless performance. It keeps your energy within you, rather than scattered across arguments that lead nowhere. Imagine a courtroom not of law, but of life. People often act as if they're on trial every day, defending their choices, their lifestyle, their voice. But the wise don't live like that. They walk through life as if their decisions are final. They know not every opinion needs to be addressed, not every attack deserves a rebuttal, and not every conversation requires their participation. This isn't arrogance, it's liberation. You must understand your silence is not empty. It's full of intent. It holds your values, your boundaries, your clarity. And in many situations, it's louder than any argument could ever be, especially when your silence disrupts a pattern. When someone expects your anger and meets your stillness instead, they start to question their own volume. That's power. Silence isn't passive, it's a declaration. It's a way of saying, I don't chase chaos. It's not that you couldn't destroy someone with words. It's that you've evolved past the need to. You've seen what chaos costs, and you've chosen peace instead. Not the kind of peace that runs away, but the kind that stands unbothered. Many people spend their lives reacting. They react to criticism, to fear, to pressure, to pain. They live on edge, constantly swinging between defense and offense. But silence removes you from that game entirely. It gives you a bird's eye view. From that altitude, things look different. What once felt personal now feels irrelevant. What once triggered you now exposes the fragility of others. Silence also reveals the truth about relationships. When you stop talking, you start observing. You begin to notice who reaches out when you don't initiate. You see who respects your boundaries and who only values your presence when it benefits them. You learn who listens when you speak and who waits for their turn to talk. And through it all, you begin to filter your circle, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. This clarity brings peace, and peace, contrary to popular belief, is not the absence of challenge. It's the presence of alignment. It's the realization that your energy is sacred, that not everyone should be allowed to disturb your rhythm, that not every situation needs your input, that sometimes the most healing thing you can do is stay quiet and let time do the talking. There's a moment in every person's journey where silence becomes a lifestyle, not out of fear, not because you have nothing to say, but because you understand the value of your voice. You understand the power in pause. You understand that sometimes space says more than speech. This is especially important in today's world, where attention is currency. People are desperate to be seen, heard, validated, but you don't need to compete in that race. When you embrace silence, you no longer chase validation, you create presence. You don't need to announce your value. It's evident in how you carry yourself, how you move, how you don't over-explain, how you don't overstay in spaces that no longer nourish you. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them misread your quiet as mystery. Let them underestimate your calm. None of that changes your power. In fact, it protects it. And yet silence must be disciplined. It can't just be avoidance wrapped in disguise. Real silence is conscious. You're not hiding, you're listening, not just to others, but to yourself. You're paying attention to your intuition, your triggers, your patterns. You're learning when to speak and when to save your breath. You're observing when your silence empowers you and when it turns into suppression. That line matters. Because silence isn't about being invisible, it's about being intentional. It's the difference between being silent because you're afraid and being silent because you're focused. One is rooted in fear, the other is rooted in freedom. And freedom is the goal. When you're no longer trapped by the need to respond, you become untouchable in a way most people will never understand. You become the observer, the strategist, the calm in the storm. Your silence becomes a boundary, a filter, a fortress. It protects your peace. It elevates your thinking. It restores your power. Think of the great minds of history, innovators, leaders, creators. Many of them were not the loudest in the room. They weren't constantly sharing every thought, every plan, every feeling. They spoke when they had something to say, not just something to prove. They understood that silence is part of creation, that stillness is not stagnation, it's preparation. Your greatest ideas will likely come in silence. Your deepest healing will begin in silence. Your most profound realizations won't happen in a crowd. They'll happen in quiet moments, when you've turned down the volume of the world and tuned into yourself. This kind of silence is active. It's reflective. It's constructive. It gives you space to process your experiences, to identify what's no longer serving you, to realign with your core values. Without it, you're just reacting to life instead of creating it. People who live without silence are often emotionally exhausted. They're constantly drained by the weight of external expectations. But those who embrace silence begin to conserve their emotional currency. They don't spend it on pointless debates, on defending their worth, or on fixing perception. They understand that their peace is too expensive to trade for temporary validation. They also understand something deeper. Silence builds character. It teaches you patience. It teaches you self-control. It teaches you to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it through distraction. And in that discomfort, you grow. You become more resilient. You begin to understand that silence is not something to be feared, but something to be mastered. It's easy to speak. It's easy to react. But it takes strength to stay still when the world is moving chaotically around you. It takes wisdom to hold your tongue when your ego wants to prove something. And it takes maturity to know that sometimes silence will speak louder than your loudest argument ever could. So, if you're on a journey of personal transformation, if you're healing, if you're building, if you're shifting into a new version of yourself, start with silence. Let it be your teacher. Let it show you what needs to go, what needs to grow, and what you need to know about yourself that noise has been drowning out for years. Silence won't always be comfortable, but it will always be revealing. It will show you your fears, your strength, your true desires. It will strip away the distractions and reveal the raw truth of who you are. And once you've met yourself in that silence, really met yourself, no opinion, no rejection, no misunderstanding will shake you again, because you'll know who you are without needing to be told. That's the final gift of silence. It gives you back to yourself. So don't fear the quiet, seek it, make time for it. Let it become your power, because in a world that never stops talking, your silence will be what makes you unforgettable. There's something rare about a person who has mastered the pause before they speak, the one who no longer reacts to provocation with urgency. That kind of person radiates a power that doesn't have to announce itself. It's felt. Their silence isn't absence, it's a signal. It tells the room they are fully in control, not of others, but of themselves. In life, most of us are taught to respond quickly. We're conditioned to fill gaps in conversation, to fix uncomfortable silences with words, to defend our honor with argument. But those who rise above that programming understand a secret that changes everything. Silence is a decision, and decisions carry more weight than reactions. The pause you take before speaking is often the most honest part of your response. It's where you collect not just your thoughts, but your dignity. Every day presents you with choices: engage or observe, escalate or de-escalate, react or remain rooted. The difference between those who constantly burn out and those who remain steady often comes down to this one skill: the ability to use silence as a tool, not a trap. Let's be clear, silence is not a mask. It's not something you hide behind when afraid of conflict. It's not avoidance, it's strategy. It means you don't hand over your power every time someone pokes at your ego. It means you've practiced enough self-awareness to realize your voice has value, and you no longer lend it to chaos without cause. This kind of power shows up everywhere. It shows up in meetings where others argue to be heard, but you speak last and speak with impact. It shows up in relationships where your lack of reply to manipulation speaks louder than any accusation. It shows up when someone expects your breakdown but receives your stillness. It's there when you respond not out of emotion, but with clarity, or not at all. And that not at all is sometimes the hardest response of all, because silence can feel like surrender when you're used to defending yourself. But the truth is, silence isn't surrender. It's strength that has stopped seeking recognition. You don't need to win every conversation to know your worth. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, and let time unravel what words cannot fix. In a world obsessed with performance, silence is rebellion. When you're silent, you are no longer performing for the approval of others. You're no longer keeping up appearances. You're simply existing in your truth, and that truth might make others uncomfortable, especially those who rely on your noise to feel control. Here's what people don't always tell you: the quieter you become, the more you hear. Not just what others say, but what they mean. Their pauses, their avoidance, their subtle disrespect or unspoken admiration. Silence sharpens your senses, it heightens your awareness, and with that awareness comes freedom. The freedom to respond with wisdom, or to walk away without regret. You begin to realize that most people are addicted to the sound of their own validation. They fill silence with noise, not because they have something valuable to say, but because they can't handle being alone with their own thoughts. But when you've spent enough time in solitude, real solitude, not distraction, you begin to see how valuable that space is. It's in that space where self-mastery is built. It's not easy at first. Sitting with silence forces you to confront your internal chaos, the unresolved questions, the fears, the grief, the anger. But the more time you spend there, the more those emotions stop controlling you. You stop reacting to everything because you've already faced the storm within. The outside noise becomes a whisper compared to what you've already endured internally. And that's where the real transformation happens. You stop proving yourself. You stop over-explaining. You stop chasing conversations that don't feed your growth. Your silence begins to filter your life. It removes the distractions, the drama, the people who only value the version of you that makes noise. What's left is your core, the quiet, unshakable self that no longer needs permission to exist. You walk into rooms differently. You speak with intent. You listen with curiosity. And when you're silent, it's not because you're passive, it's because you're powerful enough to wait, to watch, to choose your moment instead of letting the moment choose you. It's in that posture that you become dangerous in the best way. Not dangerous to others, but dangerous to systems that thrive on chaos. Your silence breaks cycles. It stops arguments before they start. It changes the emotional weather of a room. People begin to realize they can no longer pull you into old games. Your refusal to engage becomes your boundary. It teaches people how to treat you, not because you said so, but because you showed them what you won't allow. That's what makes silence revolutionary. It rewrites the rules, and those rules apply to your inner world too. Not every thought deserves your energy. Not every insecurity deserves your attention. Not every anxious story your mind tells you deserves your belief. In silence, you begin to question the noise inside you, just as much as the noise around you. You start separating truth from trauma, clarity from chaos. You realize that some of the loudest voices in your mind aren't yours. They're echoes of others' expectations. But in silence, you hear your own voice again. You remember who you were before you were told who to be. You remember what matters to you, not what's trending, not what others expect, but what your soul truly desires. And you begin to rebuild your life around that truth. This is where silence becomes creative. It's not just a defense, it's a launch pad. From silence, you make better decisions. You write better stories. You choose better relationships. You walk into purpose instead of being pushed by pressure. You start leading your life rather than reacting to it. This doesn't mean life will always be quiet, but it means you'll no longer fear the quiet. You'll welcome it. You'll crave it. Because you'll know that your silence is where your wisdom lives, where your calm is restored, where your next chapter begins. You don't owe anyone your noise. You don't owe the world a version of you that performs for approval. You owe yourself peace, and sometimes peace sounds like nothing at all. But make no mistake that nothing is everything, because when you learn to be silent by choice, you become unshakable by design. You are no longer at the mercy of the world's volume. You carry your own calm. You move with purpose, and when you finally do speak, the world listens. Not because you're loud, but because you've made your silence matter. There comes a point in your journey where you begin to recognize the difference between silence that weakens you. It's a subtle distinction, but once you feel it, everything changes. One is the silence of suppression, of hiding, shrinking, and swallowing your truth. The other is the silence of control, of presence, patience, and personal power. The difference isn't in the absence of sound, it's in the presence of purpose. Too often, people confuse being silent with being submissive, but real silence, powerful silence, is never passive. It's active, it's intentional, it's a choice that holds weight. A silent person isn't someone who doesn't have a voice, it's someone who chooses not to waste it. They know their voice has value, and they use it with precision, not for attention. There's a discipline in that. When you choose silence over the chaos of reaction, you practice restraint, and restraint is one of the highest forms of self-respect. It means you value your peace more than your pride. It means you've stopped letting the world dictate your tempo. You move on your terms. You respond when it serves you. You retreat when it protects you. This kind of silence is deeply uncomfortable for others, especially those used to controlling you through noise. They don't know how to deal with it. They expect your usual defensiveness, your familiar explanations, your predictable engagement. But when you go silent, the script breaks, the game ends, and what's left is the truth, standing in that stillness, unmasked and unbothered. People who rely on control hate that silence, because in silence, they can no longer manipulate the narrative. Your silence doesn't give them anything to push against, and that unsettles them. It exposes their need for your reaction as part of their own validation. When you remove that reaction, you remove their power. But this silence, this strength, can only come from within. It's not about proving anything to others. It's about proving to yourself that you've grown past needing to be understood by everyone. You stop forcing people to get you. You stop arguing for your position. You stop fighting to be seen, because once you've seen yourself clearly, no one else's vision can shake you. And that's the real power of silence. It forces you to see yourself. Most people avoid silence, not because it's boring, but because it's confronting. In the quiet, there's nowhere to hide, no distractions, no background noise, just you and your thoughts. That level of honesty is intimidating, but if you can sit in it, really sit in it, you'll begin to peel away everything false. You'll hear the voice beneath the noise, and that voice will tell you what you've always known but never had space to say. It'll tell you what you're tolerating that's beneath you. It'll reveal where your boundaries are bleeding. It'll show you what dreams you've buried under other people's expectations. It'll highlight the ways you've been performing rather than living. And once you hear those truths, you can't unhear them. You either act on them or you silence yourself once again. But once you've tasted real silence, the kind that liberates rather than suppresses, you won't want to go back. You'll begin to crave it. You'll seek out quiet spaces, not just to relax, but to remember. Remember who you are. Remember what you want. Remember that you were never meant to live on defense. This kind of silence isn't lonely, it's sacred. It's where alignment lives. It's where power is restored. It's where ideas are born. It's where healing happens. The world is constantly telling you to hustle, grind, go louder. But there's a deeper strength in stepping away, unplugging, and tuning into your own inner rhythm. In that rhythm, you'll hear direction. You'll feel guidance. You'll sense when to move and when to wait. And waiting doesn't mean weakness. It means wisdom. Sometimes silence is preparation. You're not being still because you're stuck. You're being still because something is shifting beneath the surface. You're being still because you're aligning. You're gathering your thought. You're reclaiming your power. And when you rise again, you'll do so with clarity, not confusion. People often rush to speak because they fear being forgotten. But the ones who are truly remembered are those who speak with substance. Their words land because they aren't scattered. They're crafted, measured. These are the voices that shape the world, not the loudest, but the most intentional. Think of the people you admire, the thinkers, the leaders, the creatives. Most of them have one thing in common. They know when to retreat. They know when to be silent. They understand that creation requires solitude, that growth requires reflection, that purpose requires space. They don't fear silence. They wield it. And you can too. Start by honoring your quiet moments. Carve out space in your day where you don't consume, scroll, respond, or perform. Just listen to your breath, to your body, to your intuition. Let the silence speak. Don't rush to fill it. Don't label it as wasted time. See it as a sacred investment. Because the more you practice silence, the more fluent you become in your own language. And once you're fluent in that, you stop needing translation from the world. You become your own reference point. From there, your life begins to shift. You make better decisions because you're no longer choosing from urgency, but from clarity. You set boundaries not from resentment, but from truth. You walk away from noise, not because you're afraid of it, but because you no longer belong in it. You understand that peace is not the absence of problems, it's the presence of boundaries. And silence is the gatekeeper of those boundaries. It tells you when something doesn't feel right. It shows you when to pause before saying yes. It reminds you that you don't owe anyone immediate access to your energy. You begin to realize that people who truly respect you will respect your silence. They won't push you to perform or respond on command. They'll recognize the wisdom in your stillness, and if they don't, they were never listening to you anyway. Silence also gives you time to study people. Not just what they say, but how they act when you say nothing. That gap reveals everything. It shows you their intentions, their character, their respect for your space. When you're always speaking, you're too busy broadcasting to observe, but silence shifts you from participant to observer. And in observation, you gain understanding. Understanding gives you power, and power when quiet is unshakable. So don't underestimate what you're building in your silence. It may feel invisible now, but it's growing. It's stabilizing you, it's rooting you, it's preparing you for what's next. You don't have to prove your process, you just have to protect it. And you protect it with silence.